it really is to help people who may be unfamiliar with the why. Why Frederick Douglass? Some of you have maybe heard me speak, or some of our other Frederick Douglass Foundation leaders speak around the country. Maybe you are on our social media with the Douglass Leadership Institute. But today I wanted to be able to invite you in to learn a little bit more about why the organizations that I lead bear the name of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And there's some unique things to us. So just for the next few minutes, I want to let you know a little bit more about why Frederick Douglass has been so important to us at the Douglass Leadership Institute and the Frederick Douglass Foundation. So here we go. Number one, it's personal. Just as a child, I was first introduced to Frederick Douglass. My mother, I remember, brought home a collection of Black history comic books. Now, these weren't DC or Marvel comic books, but these were a collection of about 20, 25 Black history comic books of famous people like Sojourner Truth, George Washington Carver, Marian Anderson, Harriet Tubman, Crispus Attucks. And as a young boy, I was really pulled into this world of Black history through these comic books. And one of the things, though, that I learned as a young boy was there was one figure who stood out. He had two comic books that were dedicated in this collection to him, and that was Frederick Douglass. So at a very early age, I was introduced to the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And when I learned even then, as a teenager, Frederick Douglass was a teenager when he first tried to escape from slavery in the 1830s. And then ultimately, on his third chance at about the age of 19, he did escape. And so as an early student, probably I was in like 6th grade, I remember getting those comic books, and that really sparked my interest as a young person. So we want to encourage you to get the word about Frederick Douglass to young people. It can spark, I hope, a new abolitionist type of movement. So that's number one. Number two.
All right, we'll pause it there, but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of, that's Reverend Nelson. He is the national chairman for the Douglass Leadership Institute. One of my personal mentors, has done wonders in helping even me. Some of you may have known me from my infancy as a politician, right? I'm very different, and he's kind of helped cultivate that leadership. And that's one of the things that we do at the Frederick Douglass Foundation. We try to cultivate leaders. We try to train people how to defend the issues that are important to us. There are 4 basic elements that the Douglass Leadership Institute, as well as the Frederick Douglass Foundation, focuses on. Strengthening the Black family unit is chief among those issues. That is something that we champion. We also focus on economic opportunity for everyone, educational opportunity in the context of school choice, as well as criminal justice reform in the context of the law. And we take on these issues that are in parallel with other social justice-minded individuals, but we try to frame it in the proper context. We do try to engage in the critical race debate and how we move forward, which brings us to our event this evening, which is a discussion centering on the self-made man. How do we adequately defend the principles and values that we hold valuable? How do we engage in the cultural workforce? And so we selected a number of individuals to participate in that discussion. This is a small group, right? This is not, we're expecting to have like a big giant auditorium. So this will be an engaging discussion. I'm going to have Devani Patterson, who is my vice chair for the Frederick Douglass Foundation. He's going to come up, kind of walk through the flow of the program, introduce some of our panelists, and then we will go from there. We'll turn it over to get into the discussion. I want to challenge you all to be part of this discussion, be thinking about it. We'll have an opportunity. Devani will explain all of that.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. As Tori said, I am Vice President of Frederick Douglass Foundation in Maryland. Tori really tapped me for that position after running for City Council President in Baltimore City. Today we really have an incredible, I think, event for you, especially with the panelists that we have for this particular discussion. So I did want to introduce the panelists, but first, we're going to have essentially 2 sets of discussion, and then our last segment is going to be where we're doing more of a question and answer segment where we can address all the panelists. So we're going to do about 30-minute discussion with 3 panelists, take a few minutes of a break, do another 30-minute session with another 3 panelists, and then we'll bring everybody up for the audience discussion. So the first panelist that we have, actually I'm going to introduce Marcel Russell. Come on up, brother. So Marcel is a entrepreneur, businessman, lives in Baltimore City. Has a passion for helping people. You're a Baltimore native too, right?
Yeah.
So Baltimore City. And when we talk about self-made, he was actually one of the first people I thought about to be on this panel and be on this discussion. So welcome, Marcel Russell. Then we can clap. So next is Yaya. How do you say your last name? Yaya Fanusi. So this guy's like a genius, literally. He's I didn't remember your bio. So you want to introduce yourself? Let me let you do that because I would butcher it right now. Yes.
So good to meet you, everybody. My name is Yaya Fanusi. I sort of work in a few different areas. I used to work in the national security space. I used to work in government. I was a counterterrorism analyst. But since I transitioned out of government, I've become more involved in the financial technology space. I'm a researcher that deals with things like cryptocurrencies and how that impacts us. Most recently, what I did a few years ago is I taught a class at Morgan State University on introducing people to blockchain technology. The reason was that I felt like there were technological shifts happening right now, and our communities, mostly Black communities, are sort of left out. And so that's one of the things. But I do that. I'm also a scholar at the 1776 Unites project, and I do cultural commentary and artistic work podcasting.
Awesome. And I'll follow that same model with Evie. I actually worked with Evie on on a show that we developed called Pop and Politics. And Evie is also on the board of elections for the state of Maryland as well. Baltimore City, I'm sorry. But Evie Harris, go ahead and just introduce yourself.
I think Javon said enough for everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for having me, having us here tonight.
That's good. This man, a lady of few words, except on the show. We're going to really get it kicked off, but I really want to, introduce our moderators. We have, first off, Lady J, Ms. Charlene Jenkins, owner of What Up Baltimore and Lady J Media. This is a lady that's on the ground every day in Baltimore City. I don't even know if she has a house. She's out there working pretty tirelessly every day, talking to the people of Baltimore. Can I share both news? So first, she recently graduated with your doctorate, right? Doctorate. With relation to mental health in the church. So any mental health services you may need, especially within the context of Christian ministry. Dr. Lady J is your person to contact. And also, not too long after we had the Family Policy Summit in Baltimore, she was a registered independent in Baltimore City, and she actually became a registered Republican. That's a big deal, right? Because we want to restore the true values of the Republican Party, especially that, when it comes to family, faith, and our central freedoms. And next, I want to introduce Ms. Euryxie Morgan. By trade, she's a lawyer. She has your own practice, right? It has her own practice. And also, you may know her from WBAL. She is, one of the hosts, so you may hear her voice on the radio, quite often. And, really, it's just an honor, to have you guys here. So we're going to kick it off. You two, can, I guess, come up and kick us off.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. Oh, okay, all right, okay. So thank you so much for coming out, everybody. And I definitely want to thank Tori Snow and Giovanni Patterson for the first invite we did in Baltimore, because you helped to change my mindset about a lot of things. So thank you for that. And that's what this forum is all about, just bringing awareness and helping people to understand what's going on in our community and what we can do to make it better. So Eurypsy and I have some questions, and we're going to ask you to feel free to answer them as you see fit. I'm sorry, can you something? Marcel. Okay, thank you. Is it okay if I find my first name? Okay, thank you. So we're going to start off with this first question. Let's see. And actually, we were talking about the economic opportunities and the economic, Giovanni had given us kind of an open-ended comment or question, but it was the economic opportunities through free market. So my question to the panel is, what types of policies would you suggest that would help to hinder or spur economic growth? That's the first question. And then the second one is, what can we do as a community to ensure that economic growth and opportunities are available to everyone? I don't know who wants to start, but feel free to jump in.
So I'm a fanatic of fundamentals of money, and so I kind of come from a world of music, money and marriage, right? So I guess the basis of what I'm talking about, my mom started the first Christian fraternity and sorority in the country, Alpha and Omega. I come from a home, my grandfather was a NAACP leader, preacher from Hijab, Wrestling, was 100. So the religious side of it, it's very important to me in regards to marriage. Money, understanding money is big to me in music, and it's affected the community. But in regards to money, I think a law should be passed that the banks have to teach or explain what are the fundamentals of how money works, in particular how they generate their income. Like things like the Rule of 72, I think it should be mandated that it's taught in elementary school. But the institutions have went to the elementary schools, middle schools, colleges, universities, and said every teacher needed these principles before you fund it. So they designed us to be insanely ignorant to fundamentals of money. I got friends who graduate finance degrees at Harvard, and I'll go over a basic finance presentation, and they'll say, we covered 2 of those on my finance. Like, they won't even know what I'm talking about. And they studied finance at Harvard. So I think the ignorance of basic principles of how money works, because if you don't, everybody jumps on whatever new trend it is. But they don't understand the fundamentals. I always ask people, how many millionaires in America? And they go, I don't know. It's 19 million. And that's enough to fill up New York and 4 other states. And they're like, are you serious? America only makes up 4% of the planet. It's about the size of half of my ear. But we have almost half of the globe's millionaires. How did they do it? Only 4 come from the lottery each day, and a small percentage come from Bitcoin. There's 1,700 new millionaires a day. Almost all of them come from part ownership of the 2,800 companies on stock market, and showing people how that works and how compound interest works and how it's just really explosive. That all of those companies would have to fail the exact same day at the exact same time. That's never going to happen in the history of the world. And so that average $15 a day can make any American in Walbrook Junction, the average person in the hood spends $15 a day eating out. And so if the average person in the hood knew $15 a day would make you 2.7, 3.5 million by the time you're 58, just using basic banking principles, I think it'll be a game changer. So most people are actually spending their wealth mostly because they're ignorant to it. So I would make a mandate that the banking principles, which I'm sure they won't, would be taught in elementary schools.
And so in other words, you feel as though a lot of what's happening is by design.
Oh, without question. I mean, I seen one guy had a video. He says the lion is not going to tell the gazelle and the cheetah. I forget. He used 2 other animals. He said they're not going to tell them of how to get away. If they did, what they going to do? Then they got to eat each other.
Right.
He said, but if you figure it out, the lion's like, all right, they figured out how to get away. But they're not going to tell the gazelle, because then the gazelle's going to tell everybody else. So the banks, in essence, are not going to tell us. But I would have some sort of mandates that you have to give some sort of basic principles to how money works. Because it's getting, I mean, Social Security is about to be gone in about 12 more years. 401k switched to pension. So at one time, the companies did the investing for you. It's over. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, now it's on you, but you're ignorant. So the numbers of where the average millennial is in retirement right now is unreal. And the seniors, so they're saying we're headed to a poverty in the next 15 years that's very similar to first century Christianity. I mean, that poverty is like something we haven't seen in 2,000 years. That's what they're saying we're headed in the next 15 years.
Wow, thank you. Yeah. Well, let's go to Eve.
So what policies do I think help or hinder? Let me start by saying, I think my overall focus would be on competition and ownership. And ownership meaning let's get the government out of more of the places where they are. Where the government, I think this is a big hindrance, that government incentivizes a lot of the, I guess I would say the uneducational, disinformation that comes. And I think people in communities, particularly Black people in the communities, in their homes, we need to take ownership of our money. So where we are investing our money in that bank or in that credit union, we need to just not go and deposit a check or have a check deposited for us from the government. We need to actually, let's go see what's going on with that money. We need to start understanding, we need to take ownership of our learning, of our own education, of our own competencies or the lack thereof. Yes, there's a place for government regulation, but I think one of the main hindrances is that we have too much. And so when the government steps in to fill that void, whatever that void may be, then the government becomes basically the father, the owner, the director of where we put our money, where we focus our attention. So I think that is one of the biggest hindrances to this idea of competition and ownership.
And I also want to make sure that we touch on the question as well, how we as a community, because when we talk about, let's say for example, going into an inner city where they don't know how to manage their money, where they don't know what the process is of going to a bank, to open a bank account. So what can we do as a community, as we're sitting here having this forum, what can we do as a community to go into those communities and help them as well?
So again, one of the things I think that would help, again, I'm going to go back to this idea of competition. And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but a lot of these policies and these ideas that we're putting forth, they kind of overlap. For instance, if we talk about the education system, a lot of our schools, we're not teaching our children financial the acumen and money management. We're not teaching them that. So one of the things that I would advocate for, if we go take the long term, is that school choice, vouchers, so that when you give ownership to that parent, to that family, to choose the school, it also creates a culture of competition among the schools. Where there's competition, the standards are going to go up. When that parent is involved, that parent has a responsibility and accountability to know what's going on, what the child is being taught. And one of the things that ownership gives you is the right to say, hey, this needs to be taught to my child or our students. These are the things that matter. It puts the weight back where it really belongs, rightfully belongs. So I think, again, these things overlap a little bit in some ways. So I think, again, I'm going to stick with that ownership, which drives the competition.
Good. Awesome.
I've sat with 2,000 families in the past 4 years to educate them on the fundamentals. My team and I, we're about 30-something licensed people, and we meet with a lot of families to educate them. We've been able to create about hundreds of millions of dollars in generational wealth, but it's to empower them to get educated and then kind of refer others and really get that message out. But it's not enough. I mean, that's cool. To answer your question, what can we do is we can start maybe creating centers if the schools are not going to do it, if the banks are not going to mandate it, but we can start creating zones or centers where there's a financial education month or something like that, where we get some of the most educated, in particular people who are licensed, because right now it's too many people running amok in the finance industry that are not licensed and regulated. They're saying stuff that if you were licensed, you can be sanctioned by the SEC or FINRA, saying you cannot legally say that. And so I tell you, I have the licenses to say what I'm going to say. I saw this guy on YouTube. he can, so sometimes I have to inbox some of these guys and say, bro, you gotta take that down. Why? And I can walk them through why. Because if our community follows that, it's gonna create generational poverty, not wealth, because you don't know what you're talking about. You worked up, that's cool, but you're not informed. Does that make sense? So, but that's some of the things that I want to stop from brother, because this is his world.
No, it's not. It's not my world. It's all of our worlds. The stuff you're talking about relates to a lot, because I do a lot. I didn't really go into it, but I do a lot with risks. People a lot of people are, sort of misguided, and they see it as something that's plain with this. You talk after this.
Can you all hear everybody? Sorry, everybody.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So yeah, I will. So I'll say three things: posture over policy. The second one, lions or sheep, and the third one, competition. Posture over policy is, in my mind, because you're asking about policy. But what I would say is that it's more important to focus on posture. As human beings, what makes us different from the animal kingdom, from everything in creation, is our uprightness, right? Our posture. So your posture is very important to deal with things being upright. And if you have a certain posture, you can deal with any policy. So policy could be, one economic policy or one political policy. If you have a certain posture, right, your posture will, your posture will dictate how you deal with the policy. So I'll just say that. The second, going off of Marcel's thought about lions and gazelles. Lions or sheep? I saw someone with a shirt one time, I was somewhere, and on the back it just said, lions over sheep. The lion, a lot of people think the lion, you think of it as like a bad savage animal, but if you think about lion versus sheep, the lion isn't waiting for its food. The lion is going to get its food. Its kill maybe, but to get its sustenance, right? Whereas sheep may, have to be led to the right place, right? A little bit more passive. And if you're a lion, right, you're going to go in any situation, no matter the poverty, the starvation, you're going to get your sustenance. The third one, competition. I used to be a teacher. I used to teach high school math in DC. And I was talking to another teacher earlier today, who's a teacher now, back in the West Coast. And I was talking about the idea of competition. Competition, from what I understand, the younger generation, I think, is averse to competition. And I think it's important for us to bring back the idea that competition is not bad. If you're in a classroom situation, right, what's happening? You're competing, but maybe you're just competing with yourself. And there's a sense right now that there's no, you don't want winners, you don't want losers, that everyone should just be, everything is equitable. But if you're a teacher, right, it's unlikely that everyone in the class is going to get an A. If everyone gets an A, you as a teacher must have done something wrong. Your principal will tell you, come on, Mr. Producer. How did everybody get an A? You're doing something wrong. And so we need to understand that there's competition in all that we produce and income.
Yes, definitely. Did you all have any words?
I talk so much, my lips are getting numbers. Let's go to the next topic, because I live this stuff.
I would like to add some things that I think would help with some policies, particularly if we're going to talk about from a government or a macro standpoint. Government, I think we need to, number one, I would say reduce taxes. Because when people have more of their hard-earned income to see fit and use as benefits themselves or their families, they make the best choices in most cases for their lives, for their situation. So that will also spur the competition. Because if I have more of my money to spend to compete in the market with, or to use this dollar to say, this dollar, I'm going to demand this service, and let's make a trade, a fair trade. I'm going to the butcher to get the beef, and the butcher needs my money. So that butcher is going to give me the best service that he can to earn my money. And I'm going to use that money to get the best cut of meat from that butcher. So I think we need to have more of our own hard-earned money, number one. Number two, in the families or in where it's called for, tax credits also help to spur that economic growth, particularly for families and individuals, and ultimately for the community. Those tax credits, we can be compassionate and still have competition. Where competition, I would say, in broadly so. Another help, if you will, is we need to reduce the size and scope of government. I think we need to reduce, government should not be the first place that we look to fix our problems. It should not be. And because when we do that, government does not produce money. Government, well, let me say this way. It produces it in a sense that it runs those, whatever the machines are to print it. But government does not generate an income on its own. It takes money from taxpayers. And I think when families, when individuals understand that, when you go to work, upwards of 50% or more of your hard-earned labor and time and effort, it's gone before you get your check. Where does that money go? A lot of it probably goes to policies that you would not support if you actually knew what those policies were enumerated. You wouldn't support them. So we need to take accountability and responsibility to go and remind ourselves that the government really works for us, and we don't need it so big that it overruns our lives.
And I definitely want to part moving on, man. In addition, you talk about roughly a little more than 100 years ago, the universe, the planet has operated the same way the entire time. It was 95% entrepreneurs. It wasn't until the industrialized revolution that you started mass recruiting people to be indentured slaves. So now it's trending. Now 95% of the country works for people. But the tax laws were never designed for people who work, who sheep. They were designed for lions. They were designed for people who create work. So it doesn't matter what employees think. The tax laws are never going to change. If you didn't create work, Jeff Bezos, I had somebody came to me and said, I have a problem with all the tax benefits you have. I said, are you tripping? I said, what? I said, number one, they said, well, look at all the money makes. First of all, 180 million people bought, what is it, the yearly subscription? I said, y'all jokers bought that. Not Jeff Bezos may buy it for himself. 180 million where you demanded a box the next day. And so then y'all talk about plans where people can't go to lunch and they can't eat and they can't. You did it. You're greedy behind. It said I wanted it in more so that Miss Judy couldn't go to lunch because they walked in the plane and said, hey, where the spots at? Because 180 million people, on 180 times 20, you're talking about a couple $1 billion. So we made him a millionaire and then get mad that he met the demand. So that being said, I'm going to move back up. I digress. My ADD. So I feel that entrepreneurship should be more of an issue of excitement for people. Baltimore leads the nation in Black-owned businesses at almost 40%. Atlanta's next at 32, DC's at 28. So I think more of that culture should be continually encouraged, where people, it's a lion mentality. The Bible has more millionaires than any religious book on the history of the planet. From Abraham to Job to Lydia to Peter, it was a mindset to go out and build, and you created work. So Jeff Bezos should be paying $0. You create enough jobs that you create 5 states of employees. You created work. You got retirement for me. You created legacy for me. You did all of this stuff for me from following the demand. I'm not saying you should pay nothing, but if the tax codes are what they are, right? Jesus says this: get the government out. He says it over 26 times. Give Caesar what is Caesar's. He's big on get the government out of your house. But he's also big on entrepreneurship. He talked a lot about building great sound businesses for your family, create legacy. Proverbs 24:27 says you shouldn't even get married and have children until you are sure you can produce an income. That whole passage is about entrepreneurship. So I think the tax codes are not going to change because they were invented hundreds of years ago when we were entrepreneurs. I think we have to encourage more people to stop talking about getting good benefits and working with somebody for 50 years and start creating your own work. There's so many needs that we all have. You can create a business. You can meet the needs of the people. But that's and I'll go back to father. To me, all of this connects to fatherhood. So I'm waiting for that time.
Oh, yes.
So I get
We're
all
getting
of
to
that.
So, and those are really good points, and I wanted to add to something that all of you said, that if you go into the cities, a lot of our inner cities, a lot of the brightest minds are standing on the corners. And so being able to go and talk to them and show them how to change their habit of being drug dealers or whatever it is that they're doing on the corners, because they have bright minds. They're already running a business.
And they don't know it's the second lowest income in the history of the world.
Right.
Drug dealers.
So-
mathematical. But go ahead.
So that's another thing that we can add on that we can do. That would be one of my things of being able, and that's what I do. I go out into the community because it's about really showing them when you talk about entrepreneurship, you can be an entrepreneur, you're already doing it, you're just doing the wrong thing. And so it's about showing them how to change what they're doing into something positive and really making money and possibly becoming wealthy. So the next question I want to ask is about, I like a couple of the questions. So this question is like near and dear to my heart, but it's about strengthening the Black family. And so the question is, and this is kind of a threefold question, so I'm just going to start with the first one. What are your thoughts and ideas for bringing Black families back together? I'll start with that question. Again, the question is, what are your thoughts and ideas for bringing Black families back together?
Well,
You can get closer to the mic.
oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, there you go.
So, one of the things that I guess I would say used to be a mainstay of the Black family and families in general is that it was important to have a mom and a dad in the home. And we knew, at least in the Black community, we knew that a child without a father, we kind of knew this, I would say, instinctively. We knew the child without a father probably was not going to be a good kid, was not going to have discipline, was going to be unruly. Today, to even say that, you invoke all these emotional reactions, and it's just the truth. Children need fathers. They need their mothers too. They deserve both parents in the home. And it should be, it's lopsided now, at least in the Black community, where more than 70% of our children are born out of wedlock. There's always been out of wedlock births, but it was not upside down like it is today. Number one, fathers. You mentioned it, you said it. Fathers are necessary. They are necessary for the home, for the rearing and raising of children. That's number one. To bring Black families back together, I think we also need to overcome or to get rid of this idea that a family is just what I say it is. There are too many definitions of what a family is. There are too many definitions, and that makes for confusion. Where there's confusion, there's no order. There's no structure. We need to have a definition, a standard by which we are measuring the vitality, the life, the healthiness of a family. We need to bring back God, religion. Does that mean, when I say that, I get criticized? Well, no one's perfect. Absolutely. I would be the first in line to say, no, I'm not perfect. That's not what I'm talking about. But we have to have a standard by which we are measuring the deviation. If we don't have that standard, then anything goes. And that's not acceptable. That's not the best environment in which to raise a child. Children deserve it, and they deserve their parents. They are made in the image of God, and they deserve to have the best chance, and the best path on which we can place them so that they can become productive, responsible adults as well.
So,
You look like you're ready
yes,
to burn.
I think I might be right.
Take your time.
America makes up 4% of the planet, but we lead the globe in 12,000 years of fatherlessness. No one has broken the record in the history of life of a nation more fatherless than America. Almost a third of the country has some sort of mental illness. That's never happened. They said the number one connection is fatherlessness, right? I have 3 daughters, I have a son, went through divorce, all that stuff. I am hardcore about co-parenting.
Yes.
Reason being, I'll just give you some numbers. There's 800,000 police officers. Everybody like to bring up police. That's so annoying. There's 800,000 now left. There's 42,000 zip codes in the United States. 800,000 divided by 42,000 is 19. That means there's 19 police officers left. Each zip code averages 9,000 people. So now we got 19 police officers left for 9,000 people. Their number one reports are saying we're resigning because of the fatherlessness. You're asking us when I stand in front of your child to be their father. They're unfathered. So basic net development of humans. By 2 and 3, we should connect correction with love. Well, the average American adult being unfathered, we're getting corrected in front of the police at 36, 3 decades later. So most of us, our connection to, I just want to go with some stats. 45,000 fathers committed suicide in the past 12 months. That's 123 a day trying to get access to their children. There was a woman in Wisconsin, a white woman, who said, I'm so grateful for Wisconsin because she said they created laws to protect me from myself. What am I talking about yourself? I tell people, if you want to understand the darkest nature of any human, look at serial killers. That's about as dark as we get. So men serial killers, when we kill the victim, we normally mark the body, and 92% of the time we go home and watch the local news, right? To see if what we did is talked about. Because the further man is from God, the more he demands respect he didn't earn. Women serial killers are different. 91% of women serial killers, when they kill their victim, they lay beside the body to watch it die, or they sit across the room. The woman in Wisconsin said we need laws to protect us from our own dark part of our nature. She said there is no laws for us women. There is no laws for our dark part of our nature. I have 3 daughters. I constantly, hey, when one looks mad, I want this one to suffer. You're 3. But that's their nature. So, and then she said, so Wisconsin has a law that before you're granted a divorce, you have to have a plan in 30 days on how you're going to co-parent this child, or we won't grant it. They cut down their crime, 3 out per 1,000. Maryland, 16, almost 20 out of 1,000. Baltimore is 70 per 1,000. That's almost third world. It's getting to 1 out of 10 people will be violently, and they said the number 1 connection, there were no laws. Paul said in the Bible, if it was not for the law, I would not know that this is sin. Paul says it must start at a law. He said before you talk about being spiritual, it's the law. He says how you know you're being spiritual is because you grow past needing the law. But you got to start at the law. He said if y'all don't have a law, you don't even know you're lawless. And this is from a guy speaking on behalf of God. So I tell people, we need laws. These are just some basic numbers. 71% in the Western Hemisphere of children killed domestically are killed by their own mother, or their own mothers. 76 of child abuse cases are done by the mother. What? I have daughters. I'm like, I need laws to protect my daughters from their dark parts of themselves. I love my baby girls, but if they feel like there's no accountability, the police reports came in. 70% of violence done in the home where the partner did not retaliate is done by American women. And so we have a documentary coming out about this, just trying to help change these laws. The government makes the money off of them. They want, why? Because if the men lead, we have less debt. I'm in the finance world, I do it. I'm in the household, the average female has 16 times more debt. The average person sees 5,000 commercials a day. 98% of all the advertisements are geared towards the emotions of women. It's agenda. They don't care. They don't care nothing about it. They're trying to get paid. They don't even want the men. They're like, I'm trying to manipulate the emotions of the women and children in the house. It is an agenda. It is the same thing in the garden. We are after the nature of this. And so I'm like, so people are like, oh, you seem like you're mad at women. No. Yeah, I believe people should be held accountable to their choice. Right? 1 Corinthians says, do not go to court for any reason, for anything you can arbitrate. Well, 75% of the cases in court could have been arbitrated, and almost 80% of the men were in there not because they were deadbeat. It was because the relationship failed. That's foul. 1.5 million false accusations are made per year in America. 75% are proven false. Those are engineers and doctors and fathers. Right? To me, this is absolutely, who leads in it? Black women. Leads in it. Black women in the past 10 years have done more false accusations than all European women in 18th and 19th century combined. We love our men. You put more of us getting beat and mutilated falsely. We were on our way to work. The police came and slammed us and beat our head, and you knew it wasn't true. 16 times more. Am I mad about? No, I'm saying there's an infrastructure to do that. Right? I know my nature of my daughter, and I know if there's nothing to protect my babies, they're going to. I didn't see my children for 7 months. When I finally got to them, there were scratches over all my daughter's face. I said, we're immediately changing all this. Why are you surprised? No, I know the nature of life. It's human nature. It's not personal. The universe designed how was the universe designed. So I know my baby. So that being said, I'm gonna back up because I can give, stat after stat after stat. In Baltimore City, the Baltimore Sun came out with a report. It said 92% of females that did not have an active father will destroy their marriage within 8 to 10 years. Black women right now lead in the lowest in American world history at 24% in America. But they file for divorce at 86%.
All right, now I want you to hold that.
Okay, because I'm listening.
Because you preaching a sermon, so we
Yeah, I'm for, I want family, and I want, because our molestation of our women and rape has gone up by 6 times since we removed fathers.
Right, and I'm not even making light of it. I appreciate your passion.
Yeah, I should have brought me some water and a muffin. If I said the muffin, I would have been the muffin.
We have another panel, that's why I want to.
You might need your blood sugar on.
I'll just say three things real quick. One, obey the law against fornication and adultery. 2, marriage success is probably 90% of what you do after marriage as opposed to what you do before. And then 3, it's a family affair. And so the first one is, we know there's not a law on in Maryland, Annapolis against fornication and adultery. But I think the key is that there is a standard that we need to follow. That there is something called fornication, there is something that's adultery, and it's bad. That's pretty straightforward, but if you go by what you see sort of mainstream, that doesn't exist. So I think if you solve if you made it a standard to not fornicate, and fornicate for the younger generation out there that maybe doesn't go to church or mosque or synagogue, fornication is when you have sex outside of marriage with someone that's not your spouse. And adultery is when you do the same thing and you're married. And so that would actually do a lot, because when you know you're not supposed to fornicate, you get married. When you know that you're not supposed to commit adultery, there's pressure for you to not mess up your marriage. Now, obviously, mistakes happen and people do those things, but we don't even have that as a standard in our public consciousness. So that would be, you can't have a black family if it's okay to fornicate and commit adultery. Second, the thing about before, even when I was in college, I started to look at man, it seems like when you get married, the success, because I come from a divorced family, my parents were divorced, my father stayed in my life, but my parents were divorced. And I think most of the success comes with how you handle the marriage, not that you spend all that time, sleeping with them and doing all this thing, to figure out if it's going to be successful. My data point is, and this is not to say, like anyone, my wife and I, we have to work on our marriage. But I point out to people, I'll tell my family, my kids, I met my wife in August, proposed in October, and we got married in June. And that was, 21 years ago next week, God willing. And that's not to say that like I said, we're tenuous like anybody else. That's not a guarantee for anything. But what it means is that, the basics, the principles about what do you want to marry or what is important, you actually can find that out pretty quickly. Once you do that, then it's the work of making that marriage work. And that's the toughest thing. Like I said, I saw my parents, it's tough. The third thing, it's a family affair, meaning, I think it's important, one thing that we've lost is that, when you marry, it's almost like you got to realize you're marrying a family, not an individual. Even if you don't see the in-laws, your person you're married is part of the family. So I think a big reason why sometimes our families aren't as strong is because we are just so much, when it's just the two of you, hey, that can break up real quick because, it's just, hey, you have an argument and you're tired of that person, like, who Splitsville? And I think if you are more connected to your wife's family or your husband's family, or even just understand you're seeing them as part of the family, if you try to bring the families together more, then that is going to make it more difficult to break up. Not a guarantee. None of this is a guarantee, right? Nobody's perfect. But I think those things would help us as a family, as a community.
Because I don't mind marriage is work. I was married for 27 years. It's work. It's not a lot of work.
And I still wonder what she said to 30 seconds.
1 minute.
So, like Yaya said, the work is for the marriage. So for so many people have been divorced. My parents were never married, so I didn't even come from a family that was my mom married my dad. But I can say my dad really wasn't in my life. He was kind of in the streets. He's a better grandfather than he was a father today, and I so appreciate that. But for those people who are divorced or have been divorced, I would strongly urge that you make that divorce or how you relate in the divorce, because that's important. That has an impact on the kids too.
Absolutely.
So you have to still make the child, the dependent child, the focus at how we're going to parent as best as we can, even if we're not living in the same household. But I don't want to encourage people to start there. I want you to start, try to have a household, marriage, make the best of it. And we know in all cases it's not going to work, but then you make the best of that and still focus on the child.
And we're gonna move along really quickly because we have another panel that's gonna come behind. And just to follow up, piggyback on that, I have a couple more things that I wanted to ask you in relation to what you just talked about. So if you give me some really quick answers or some advice. As we know, we have a lot of black on black crime going on right now. We have a lot of that going on. We also have a lot of African American men who have criminal records who cannot get a job. They are trying, but they cannot get a job because of their criminal records. And we have a lot of fathers right now. Father's Day is coming up, but we have a lot of African American fathers who are incarcerated and they can't be at home. And so, in your opinion, what is it that continues to plague the African American families where we keep falling into this type of these problems that are in our communities?
You said quick answer?
Very quick.
30 seconds.
He actually gave us a lot of information in his comment. He actually gave us a lot.
I think if I could sum it up, I would say a lack of accountability, a lack of responsibility, a lack of self-discipline. And that, again, we can unload that in different ways, but I think it still starts back in the home, what's being taught and what's not being taught. That's my 30 seconds speech.
Okay.
My 30 seconds is, there are hard breaks. It's interesting you ask this question because I have an uncle who we just found out is getting out back home in California. This is my mom's younger brother. He's been in 26 years.
Wow.
It was three strikes. And so we're very happy that it sounds like he's going to be out in the next month. But if I would tell you the story, though, my uncle, as much as I love him, he was in and out of jail since he was like juvenile. And so he was, unfortunately, got into a bad situation and did all that time, but there were all these little steps throughout his young life. And so there's no easy solution. There's hard breaks, especially when you put yourself in a situation like that.
Shared parenting. Also, shared parenting with all us off the break, equal access. I guarantee, I believe Baltimore crime would go down about 50% if we had shared parenting and mandates for all of these young children who's doing all of that to be with their fathers. I can go into insane stats about when you remove a father, what that does to the mind of the child almost immediately in terms of violence. But I'm gonna just say laws around shared parenting need to be mandated for the sake of all of our safety. That's all I have.
And I just wanted to add that I agree with all of what you all said, and we do need men in the homes, and if you're not in the home, like you said, there needs to be some shared parenting. Like I said, I was married for 27 years and then divorced, but my son is right there, he's 25, and his dad and I did an excellent job, I think, of shared parenting. And so it definitely makes a difference, and actually we were talking when I came to the home tonight, so, that's very important. Because as a woman, I can't mother my son, especially when he was going into puberty. I don't know what it's like to be a man, so we definitely need our men. The next question, criminal justice reform within the context of the law. Again, a lot of our black fathers are incarcerated.
Yeah,
I want to make sure everyone here has.
Okay, all right, cool.
Pass it out, muffin up.
Thank you all for your
Yes, just take this just a couple minutes. I want to give people a couple minutes, stretch your legs, and then we'll start again in 2 or 3 minutes.
I'm on the west side.
This is my first in-person event, so I didn't think we need mics and mics. Are you ready for this?
I need to connect with her because that's all they do. They do a show for station every other Monday. My station is, no, I have my own radio station. It's called What Up and they do a show, they are constantly large protests. They do something every yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes, that was very good. I need to talk to you guys. I need to have a conversation with Tori. That's what I'm saying tonight. I'm sorry. This is my card, and we're going to talk because I need to talk to you as well. I need to get your information. Sharing. It just got so good when I was there. And I'm like, hey, this is what I'm looking for, you know? And I don't see it, and I'm lost in undergrad. I don't see it.
I actually have copies of the report.
So, I want to talk on that for a minute. Can you see me?
All right, we're going to get started here in just a minute. While you guys are milling about and heading back to your seats, I did want to give you guys a quick update. This Saturday in Baltimore City at the Greektown Event Square, Bob Woodson Sr. Anybody familiar with him? He's the head of the Woodson Center. We will be having the Douglas Leadership Institute Leadership Awards. That'll be happening this Saturday evening, Juneteenth celebrations, and we will be having this banquet. We're going to have Bob Woodson there. I have a couple of tickets. If you are interested, please see me. It's a fundraiser for the Douglas Leadership Institute. I think registration closed as of today, but due to my powers, I suppose. I have a few tickets. If you really want to be in that room, it's going to be really, really big. I really would encourage you. Catch me after this program, and I can get your information and make sure that you get added to the list because we want as many people there to support Bob Woodson and the work that the Woodson Center is doing. At this time, we're going to continue our discussion with the Rivers Morgan 35.
All right, so I'm so glad that you were all able to make it. That was an incredible discussion. First off, I'm so glad that I was able to hear. We're going to go through some similar questions. We're going to add a couple of topics. We're going to start with the topic of access to quality education. This is one that hits pretty close to home for me. Both of my parents were immigrants. My mom fled the Civil War in El Salvador. My dad came from Mexico. And they had nothing, literally nothing when they came to this country. And my mom learned English from Washington General Hospital. So, literally nothing. And the one thing I can remember them saying over and over again is get a good education. That's how you're gonna make it in this country. Get a good education, get a good job. I basically had two choices growing up, being a doctor or a lawyer. I said I was gonna do neither, and then I became a lawyer. So, that wouldn't work out. But there are a lot of children that today are growing up with the idea that they don't have that same opportunity. So Dr. Tony Campbell, I'm going to give you guys all an opportunity real quick just to introduce yourself. We have Dr. Tony Campbell.
Oh, so to speak now? Yeah, so Tony, only my students call me Dr. Campbell. Towson University, been there for 16 years, teach political theory, religion and politics, American government, worked in the White House, worked on the Hill, managed some nonprofits, that kind of stuff. So,
and now we have Latoya Congolo.
Good evening, all. My name is Latoya Congolo, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and licensed clinical drug and alcohol counselor. And my husband and I co-own a outpatient mental health facility, work-life behavioral health in Glen Burnie, Maryland.
And then we have Giovanni Patterson.
Good evening, I'm Giovanni Patterson. I just consider myself an all-around good guy. Professionally, I work as a cybersecurity engineer, helping state and local governments protect their networks. Most recently, I ran for city council president of Baltimore City. Unsuccessfully, but we did get the most votes ever for a Republican candidate. I'm just happy to be here. I live in West Baltimore with my wife and 2 kids.
So those are our panelists. And going back to the question of education, you can see how all of our panelists probably have a pretty solid understanding of this issue. When it comes to education, as I said before, there are a lot of students that are growing up with the mentality that they're not going to have the same opportunity. So what message do you think that students are getting today, particularly in Baltimore City, but elsewhere as well? What message do you think they're getting today, and what can be done about it?
I don't think they're getting a message, or the message is negative, that it's not important for learning and education and success and the things that I'm 55 years old, so my parents taught me that same thing. I'm a first-generation college student, and it was expected for me to succeed. And I think our students today, they're getting a whole bunch of excuses why they shouldn't succeed. It's almost like, well, you're not going to succeed because you are this, you are this, you are this, you are this. And so and I think this is planned, that then you're feeding into that. And we're all we're human beings, and if negative stuff goes in, negative stuff's going to come out, because that's how we're hardwired. So I've been on the board of a charter school in Baltimore City, and we've had, it was a middle school, 6th or 8th grade. When they got to us, they were 3 grades behind in reading and math. When they left in 8th grade, they were at or above grade level. These kids are from East Baltimore, not the safest place in the world, but they succeeded because we demanded that they succeed. There was no question. You turned in your homework. You did what you were supposed to do. And so I believe that every kid can learn. The question is the adults who are running the school systems. And right now, we have people who say they're about education, say they're about equity, but they're really about themselves and not about our children. And that's unfortunate. And we talk about school choice, and I think those are good things. But then the state decides how many charter schools can exist in Baltimore City, and they don't allow them because of the teachers who use that control of politics of education. So it's all a cycle of, and quite frankly, our students are paying the price for 2 generations.
And we're gonna talk about that accountability aspect in just a moment. Latoya, what do you think? What message are kids hearing? And from your perspective and the work that you do, what impact does that have on children?
Yeah, and, you know, definitely with the work that I do, I did some social work in the public school systems, and I can tell you that the schools seem to be straying away from reading, writing, and arithmetic. There is a lot of social services being done in schools, and a lot of the focus now is, you know, how do we feed the kids? How do we address the trauma? How do we address, you know, the abuse that's going on in the house? Having DSS come in, how do we increase access to mental health services? And I'm a proponent of it. I mean, I understand the importance of it. However, I still feel that we need to get back to basics. And we need to now put more emphasis on how do we prepare these children academically to be successful as adults. So that I really think that there should be more emphasis on that.
Giovanni?
So Latoya took my answer. Looking at my notes. But there was a book that Tori recommended sometime last summer called Self-Taught, in which you know, I didn't read the whole thing, but the first 2 chapters are amazing. I recommend everybody read that. But it talks about how, you know, even you know, when during slavery, there was an appetite for education. We have a culture that doesn't really, like, everything's just fed to us now. I mean, we have a smartphone and young people. You know, there's a lack of the respect of education. Like, even this past school year, our kids weren't really writing. You know, all online, all typing, all virtual. That pen to paper exercise was missing. So the basics, we do have to get back to the fundamentals, such as reading, such as writing, and such as, you know, arithmetic, and get away from a lot of the feeling aspects of education. We have to also go back to critical thinking, you know, and not and away from the teacher dictating the narrative of every subject and every topic. You know, there's an argument that should critical race theory exist in school, and I've actually been torn on this because if we're teaching kids how to think, then we can argue critical race theory versus the 1776 project and those type of things. And there would be legitimate arguments within the school system about those things. But instead, we're trying to say one or the other without the critical thinking aspect of it. But from a policy perspective, I do believe we have to restore agency to the entire community to be involved with how the education system works. For example, in Baltimore City, our school board is fully appointed by the mayor. So no citizen within the city has any say on who's on the school board. So when we take away that agency and give it to someone else, you know, we're essentially, you know, up to someone else's discretion when it comes to our education system. So I do believe, you know, one, we need to restore agency to our population for school board. Also, the dollars need to follow the child and a proponent of school choice.
I like all those answers. So let me ask you about criminal justice reform. This is one of the, I think, more difficult topics that we've covered. When it comes to the issue of criminal justice, I think we can all agree that there's been a time in America's history where the Black community has been wrongly treated. There's no discussion about that. That is a fact. Now, moving on, we are in the year, in a different year. We are in a different time, but we're still plagued by a lot of the same problems. One of the problems that we've seen in dealing with criminal justice reform is a tendency to overcorrect. So what we're seeing right now in Baltimore City, and oftentimes the Baltimore Sun or other publications will come in and they'll interview neighbors on the street after a shooting has occurred. And oftentimes these neighbors will say, we need more police in the area, where the police don't show up until after something has happened, which is kind of the opposite of the message that we're hearing. So how then do we correct the wrongs of the past when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to mass incarceration, without overcorrecting and leading to a situation where there are no rules, there are no laws, and anything goes? Go ahead.
We went that way. So I think what we're seeing really is again, the breakdown of the order of society. I believe the first rule of law actually comes from the home. And when you have order in the home, you can then have order in the streets, you have order amongst the city hall. What we're trying to do is essentially replace our police for fathers, and then the police only really come in when a really negative act happens. So, murders, drugs, all those type of things. We have to restore the community relationship between the role of the officers and the role of the home. Because there used to be a time where if you got in trouble, I know when I got in trouble as a kid, and the police got me, they took me straight to my parents. Or, we're calling home. We don't have that ability right now because the families are broken. There's no way, the kids aren't really accountable to any other type of structure. So they have to be locked up. They have to go, to jail, which is the way things are right now. I honestly, truly believe it really starts with the culture. And we have to create a culture where we're able to hold everyone else in our community truly accountable. So, we can't clean somebody else's closet until we clean our own.
I think the words that come to mind for me are prevention and intervention. And I look at prevention with, how can we address these issues before it becomes a criminal issue? And whether it be with the police, whether it be with the schools, what we're seeing is that, a child who comes from a cracked foundation, I'm going to say, they are more likely to enter the criminal justice system. I've talked to attorneys, I've talked to police officers, myself as a social worker, we all see the same profile in a person. Even though we're all, in different kind of fields, but we all touch the same sort of people. And we see that it's usually someone who comes from a single parent household, who lacks supervision, someone who just doesn't have that strong foundation from the beginning. So if we're able to do some sort of prevention early on by addressing these issues while they're children, establish those rules, establish law and order, establish respect and authority, then that person will be least likely to end up in the system. One thing I want to say about criminal justice, another issue that I've seen when it comes to intervention is obviously difficulties finding jobs once individuals are released. I've worked with men who had poor credit scores because they had so much child support in arrears, they owed so much money that it affected their credit score. One of the things that we do here in Anne Arundel County, which I've been really impressed with, is that we have an expungement clinic. So every once in a while, maybe a couple of times a year, we'll have, open up a community center where individuals can come in and they can get minor offenses expunged. And that kind of opens some doors for them in a sense to be able to now get the job opportunities, now start to rebuild their lives. But that's more of the intervention stuff. But I think with everything, we have to start early. Everything starts early.
Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I like those two answers. I wish I could just say that and just keep my mouth shut. Everything starts with education. There was this old commercial when I was a young person. Either we can pay for it on the front end or pay for it on the back end. And that's where we are right now. Decades of negligence, decades of failure, decades of failed leadership by people who look like us, who've been in power, that have made terrible decisions that have led us to this point. We either pay for it on the front end or on the back end. I'm gonna say something that's gonna be pretty bad, probably. And where we are right now is relativism. And that's what social justice is about. There's no standard. There's not a standard anywhere in our society. And so when there's not a standard, then that means that whatever is okay is okay. The problem with that is that if you're not one of the producers, you're one of the consumers. And if you're a consumer, then you're left with the best available option. And for a lot of folks who look like us, the best available option is making a quick buck when they can, however they can. And that just leads down there.
You mind if I just add something to that? Because you just really touched something in me with your comment. What I have found is that, honestly, a lot of people who are in desperate situations, who are in lower income, lower brackets of, society or what have you, they honestly want to have to do that. And they have honestly, I rarely see say, I get a handout. Rarely do I see that. Most people come be in low income housing. I want to take care of my family. They genuinely want that, but it's hard to see what you don't see. And now we have to seek that and take it over.
And the bad thing about it, it's perpetrated by people who look like us, because there's folks who get paid off of dependency. Folks who have made their living for decades off of dependency. Giovanni knows this better than, look, I ran for city council in 1999 in Sheila Dixon. That's how far back I go. But, Giovanni lives this. And it's the same cycle over and over and over again. And that's what ticks me off. That we should know better, but we just don't.
Yeah, so when it comes to education too, and education, it plays a big key into this. And there's this quote from Hugh Hall, which was one of Frederick Douglass's masters, which he was essentially scolding his mistress for teaching Frederick Douglass how to read. Because the quote by him is that, if you teach that N-word how to read, it'll forever forbid him to be a slave. And our education system essentially is undereducating our kids to the point where essentially they're subjects of the state or whatever not criminal, but the pipeline or prison system that's set up in our community.
Yeah, either they're living subsistence to the state or they're being housed by the state.
Yeah, and to the other point about, it's people that, look like us, I was speaking with the president of the NAACP in Baltimore City, and he said to me, I asked him about why isn't the NAACP more vocal about the injustice within our school system? Because we know it's the true pipeline to prison, or school to prison pipeline. Why aren't you more vocal about that injustice, especially after the Augusta Phelps Savage, made national news? And he said to me, our school system doesn't know how to educate Black kids. And I really thought about this. Our school board in Baltimore City is 9 out of 10 of them are African
be in the house with a woman, his family. For her to get the help she needed to pay rent, welfare. You know I'm telling the truth. This is an orchestrated mess we got ourselves into. So I would like to see us look at economics. Can you imagine what would happen to us if we just spent our money on us for a year? Just 1 year. That's all it takes. And if the handwriting and these women out here, they don't want a man. They think they can raise these boys. You can't raise a man, boy. You can't do it. But that's, I'm
I'm
just.
going to let you guys, who wants to speak first?
Well, can I, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so Miss
Leah.
Miss Leah, I'm sorry. So there was I think she's an attorney, her name is Maggie Anderson, and she wrote a book, it's called Our Black Year, to your point about spending on us. And she's a Black lady with a family, and so for a whole year, they focused on only purchasing, buying groceries, clothing from Black-owned businesses.
Yes.
And what they found out was that there were not a lot of Black businesses, and I think they went to Chicago, I think. But there were not a lot of Black businesses, but they had to fund their family or to feed their family. So that was a struggle, but she put that effort in, and part of that was her research. And the economics is very important. When we don't have fathers in the home, you mentioned the 50s. I use the Good Times show analogy a lot of times. The Good Times family, they were intact, they were poor, they lived in the projects, but they refused to take the subsistence of the government, except for that family housing. But they struggled, but their family was intact.
I don't mean to, but I have to share this. I remember, because my family members was the first Section 8 in Maryland. And I knew we were going downhill then. Putting them young gals in homes with Section 8, paying no rent practically. And first thing they did was bring up the boo in and the who, and it was just an orchestrated effort to where we are today. So I'm saying we really need to take a check on ourselves and stop blaming other people for what we are.
Well, there's some blame to go all the way around.
Yes.
Because it is orchestrated. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, what people were talking about, now we had a different economic situation because we had segregation. We had to have our own businesses. Pendorf, where all that stuff happened a few years ago, that used to be Harlem and Baltimore. Because we had to have our own. We couldn't buy from Macy's or wherever else because we weren't allowed to go to those stores, right? So I think what we need to do is to recover that, is to be producers instead of being consumers, because we got all wrapped up in it. Yeah, I'm gonna buy a new flat screen TV. Who you making richer? Either the Japanese or the white man.
In agreement with them, I constantly challenge African Americans. If you guys are not interested in equality, you're interested in envy. That's a demon. Right. Well, I want to move that white people, then you're done, because 95% of white people broke. So I'm not moving next to nobody that's failing, especially if you had the cheat code, you still failed. I'm definitely not moving next to you, right? So I'm like, now you guys, so you're just moving next to people because of programming. It's not about equality, it's about envy. So you can, what was the benefit, the competition, I always talk about the definition, one of the primary definitions of competition means to face and to struggle. That's what it means to compete, right? So big guy was outside, going to kill my children, this is competition. I need them to live. It just means to face and struggle. We created and made it about external people, so envy and all this other twisted stuff. But competition, when blacks had to do that, we had to compete. We had to use our talent, we had to use, and so now when we did that, when we got rid of that, now it's about, no, I want to live where they live. No, listen, the Asians now have doubled their net worth over white America. They left them. They left them, and Jewish community. They're not checking for white America. We're the only ones who bring up what they're doing. The Asians don't care. The Koreans' net worth is twice as white America. They left them. We're the only ones, and so we worship them more than to be in God. But that's a whole separate. But the question you asked specifically was, can you ask the question again? Because it was a point that you said in the question. When you stated with her, it was a statement you said. No, am I tripping? Or you said something about? Am I tripping? It was a statement you said.
About the family?
About the family structure that we dropped the ball,
About the fathers.
the fathers in the home.
Marcus Garvey was funded by fathers. Martin Luther King was funded by fathers. Malcolm X was funded by fathers. What they understood is if you remove the fathers, you don't have to worry about people raising up in economics. You don't have to worry about anything. It was from fathers. The last thing I try to share with African Americans, two things you cannot look at right now, unfortunately. And as a guy who spent a decade in the ministry, this is tough to say, but ministers, judges, and attorneys. 1,500 people leave the parishioner a week in the ministry. Over 40% of ministers have slept with somebody in their congregation, and 77% have admitted to having some sort of mental illness. And so that's the religious leaders. Of the top 505 professions, attorneys and judges lead of the top 505 in mental illness, alcoholism. So these two groups, I'm like, we gotta have a conviction about our family. This is all designed by the federal government and corporations. And so I just wanted to, I guess.
And you're not wrong about that. So I think Tori's gonna get another question.
Anyone else in the audience?
Anything related to the economics, family?
Yeah, to the family. I just wanted to say that the ideal goal is to get fathers back in homes. But until that happens because of rules, policies, and the things, as you were talking, I was just thinking what my church did. They created a ministry, I believe it was called Sons, pre-COVID, where fathers would volunteer their time to take out the kids from single parents, take them to the baseball games, take them to football games. It was an organized thing. You could go as a group, and it was you ministered to them while you had them, and you poured into their lives, and it was done on a monthly basis. So this was an actual ministry. It wasn't just to pick you up one time and never see you again. And they were able to pour in these young men's lives, as well as have sessions in the church, leadership and stuff. And then at the end, there was some, like a graduation. So using, fathers who have extra time or just want to pour into other kids is an opportunity.
I have a question actually for our panelists. When you think about our general discomfort with the victimhood mentality, you think about Frederick Douglass's Self-Made Man, which if you haven't read that speech, I really encourage you to read it. They would have canceled him in a heartbeat. What do we need to do, right? Like, what do we need to do today that we're not doing? And, what is it going to take for us to get to that next step?
I think it's happening already. A bourgeoisie class is being developed. Every nation has classes, and it's not because you want to develop classes. Most classes were developed because there was a small group that got sick of the majority, and then they started making more value decisions. And then they started being more unified. And so what's going to happen, I believe, over the next decade in the African American community is there's going to be a bourgeoisie that the rest of the group is angry about, and they left them. But it's like we lost everything trying to bring you here. And so I think what's forcing itself, kind of like a diamond, is a bourgeoisie class that's being created much like Tulsa. Tulsa wasn't just created because they wanted, it was a group of blacks who had a certain value system, and the rest of the blacks were lining up with the white American agenda, and that group wasn't having it, and they came together, and boom, a town of 10,000. So I think what is just going to naturally happen on its own, I think it's happening. Look at this. Stuff like this is going to keep happening, and we're going to run into another group, and we're going to figure out it's not as big as we thought. It's going to be 5,000 of us in a city, 10,000. We're going to have conferences, and it's like Marcus Garvey having buildings with 260,000 people like mine. I think it's naturally happening.
But speaking of the values, what Tulsa was built on was family, was a value of family, was a value of education, was a value of economic, exactly. So I think we need to get back to that. And one of the things that I always tell young people when they go to college, men and women, but I say it differently depending on the gender. I say when you graduate from college, I want you to graduate with a BS and an MRS, okay? And I tell the men, I want you to graduate with a BS and I want you to find you an MRS. Because the truth is that we have to start young. My mother told me something, and my mother was a very honest, genuine, authentic woman. But she told me that the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. But what she said was that you have to start young. Fruit grows from a young vine. And when you start young with your family, building your wealth, building your business, then you'll reap the benefits. So now, I'm not there yet, but getting there. But what I'm saying is that we need to be intentional when we go to college and, seek that partner out that we're going to be able to grow and build with. When we go on a job, we need to look at that job as a temporary solution. Go there, learn skills, get in management, learn those transferable skills so you can now move towards opening your own. Because the LLC is the important, that's the easy piece. For me, it was really the operational stuff. When I worked at mental health clinics, I learned how they ran, how they treated clients when they walked in the door, how to do an effective assessment, how to bill for those services. And I took all of that and opened my own clinic and got it off the ground a lot easier. So we have to look at the job as temporary. Get that 401k early. I got mine when I was about 22 years old, and I remember the guy telling me, one of my coworkers, older man, you need to open up a 401k. I'm like, why? I'm not like 22. Like, that's the stupidest thing you can say. Build that money, let them match you, and then you can use that money for your house, for your bill. Oh, what? Nobody talked to me about this stuff. But these are the things that we have to start doing early. And this conversation, I just want to say, is not about race. It is not about being critical of the Black community. This is us. We need to be accountable to our community. We've made it here. We're sitting here. We need to take our information and resources and take it out to the community because they need us. And that's our responsibility.
So I think it's very important to the original question to remember freedom. I think the greatest evil that we face is that we've forgotten, and that we've forgotten who we are. We try to identify with everything external and not really look within. So I think the greatest evil again is that we forget who we are and whose we are. And we have to really go back and remember that we're free people. Regardless of the chains any government tries to put on you, regardless of the chains society tries to place on you, remember the founding documents of this country, where it says all men are created equal, and you have the right to pursue life, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when you remember the fundamentals of that, and remember that you are free, there's nothing that can hold any community back. I remember Shelby Still said on one of the Douglas leadership calls, and if you're not a member, definitely be a member because these calls are amazing. He said, he's like, what's plaguing the Black community? And he said, our community just doesn't know how to be free. We don't know how to not have somebody tell us what to do.
And we don't know our history.
Exactly. So when we understand what freedom is and remember what freedom, because it's already inside you, God created us all as free individuals. And when we remember that, everything changes.
I'll say something simple, I think, is, especially for the men, socializing with each other, being friends. So I think a lot of times we talk so much about these big things and the big policies and the big structural things that need to happen. And I think women are more, it's easier for them to socialize. And I think for men, we just have to socialize more, like just do something. I was talking to Tori, I was like, hey, we got to go out, go on a boat, and, just do something fun with each other. And I think that's how you get social bonds. And then when you have those social bonds, then the business follows, the other things all follow. But first you have to have a social bond. So I think we should hang out more.
Wonderful. Can we go on? Let's a hand, please. All right, I don't want to keep you here all night, but Giovanni is really big about pushing me about the what's next. I want everyone to look around. I learned a lesson 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Eurus remembers this. Remember our first event that we did? And we had a Frederick Douglass, I don't even know if I knew you had there, 5 people in this room. And I remember being so disappointed, we didn't have the big crowds. We easily could have filled this room with whatever message, with whatever we're doing, with tons of people. I don't want anyone to walk away from this activity tonight feeling that it was not productive. You have some of the most powerful thinkers in the state of Maryland right here in this room. I really believe that. Every single person on this panel was handpicked. Giovanni and I spent like 3 days trying to figure out who we were going to get to be part of this discussion. This message has been recorded, this message is being put out, and more importantly, this message is being reproduced. I assure you, with a certainty, for every one of us that are in this room, there are 15 or 20 others that are in Baltimore City, I'll be so bold as to say. In the city, in the state of Maryland, there are people who are invested in our community as we are. I want to encourage you. I don't want anyone to ever feel discouraged that the movement is lost. Some people may say it's about republicanism. To me, it's about neither of those. This is about a passion for what our community can be. I read too much history to accept the narrative that is coming from the 1619 Project, to just accept that where we are is where we're always going to be. I know we can do better, and I know there are other people that just need to get that push. So with that in mind, I want to challenge you all with at least 3 specific actions. The first one is very self-serving. I would invite you to go to fdfmaryland.org, join the Frederick Douglass Foundation, become a member. We try very hard to be very frugal with the resources that we are blessed with, but it does take resources for us to do some of the things that we're doing. We're building, we're continuing to strengthen our platform. Join the foundation, you get emails, you get updates, you get access to our Leaders Lives call. Join the Frederick Douglass Foundation of Maryland. That's one thing. Number 2, there is an event happening in Baltimore City this coming Saturday. Douglass Leadership Institute Juneteenth, it's an annual Juneteenth awards dinner. If you are able to be there, if you want to be there, let me know. I'll find a way to get you into that room. I think ticket sales ended at 5 o'clock today, but if you want to get there, I will get you in that room. We need people. There's going to be a lot of people. I think right now, last we checked, when I was checking some emails, we have 70 or 80 people. Bob Woodson Sr. is going to be there. This is something that we built. Right? We didn't get help from anyone else. We didn't go begging for the Republican Party or anything. They came to us asking to be part of this, right? And that's what we're building here. We're pushing this movement. So I want to encourage you to be aware, if you're able to make it to our event Saturday, be part of that. And then, Giovanni, I think we scheduled a membership meeting for the Frederick Douglass Foundation of Maryland for the
Next Tuesday. Yeah.
Next Tuesday evening. It'll be a Zoom call. Even if you're not a member, the invitation will go to members, but if you're here tonight and you want to be part of that Zoom call, just make sure I have your contact information. We'll make sure you're invited to that. Those are just 3 things that you can do related to the foundation. I want to encourage you to tell a friend, talk to your friends about our movement, connect with each other, network with each other. There are people from a broad variety of backgrounds. Make sure you connect with Yaya. He is amazing. We've been chatting. He's a scholar. He's a scholar with 1776 Unites. His wife is working on, is she still doing the program in Baltimore City? Can you tell people just about the program?
About my wife's works? Yes, so my wife works for an institution that is located in Towson, and it is called the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. And it's an interfaith educational organization. And she runs a program called the, oh my God, I'm blanking on Justice Leaders Fellows. And this program is a program where it focuses on Baltimore, and they get leaders from around Baltimore who want to deal with the issue of justice, but from a different perspective. And this year, their cohorts are dealing with economic empowerment. And if I could share a little bit, she wanted, people were talking about sort of economic justice, and she took it and she said, well, you can't have justice without being economically empowered. And so this program runs every year, and I know next year she's going to want to get others involved. So can I give her everyone's card?
Yes.
That's just, and I think she would really want to link up with you all.
And that's the kind of thing, you're going to want to connect with Ms. Leah Gray with Maryland Cure, very involved with criminal justice reform. Ripsy Morgan, WBAL, myself, WBAL, Lady J with What's Up Baltimore. There's power in this room, movements grow from what you are seeing here. So I don't want anyone walking away feeling like, oh, I thought it would be bigger or anything. We focus on quality, not quantity. Right. So with that in mind, I want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for being here.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.